Welcome to the Intentionists podcast, where we explore the interplay between intuition, spiritual health, and everything in between. I'm your host, Hillary Zwallen.
And I'm Aimee Schreiber. Our intention is to create a dialogue that inspires you to consciously forge your path with curiosity and compassion for life and its mysteries. Hello and welcome to our episode today. Today I am going to be interviewing my sweet husband because Hillary is on vacation. His name is Danny.
Hello.
And thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me, my dear.
Today we are going to be focusing on the concept of identity and personal evolution, and kind of how do the roles that we play and the masks that we wear kind of create this concept of self for us, and how to consciously and continuously evolve by being able to kind of drop those masks.
Yes, good stuff.
And you are kind of an expert at reinventing yourself, having lived many lives.
Yeah.
And sometimes out of necessity, but sometimes consciously choosing to start over in one way or another. It has been kind of a major theme of your life so far. So why don't we just start kind of at the beginning with the timeline? How did you grow up, and how do you think that, like, what early lessons did you learn that kind of created this progressive attitude?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if progressive is the right word, but like the wanting to continually improve yourself.
Sure. I think one of the key factors was that I moved around a lot when I was very young. I was always the new kid in school and was always forced into uncomfortable new situations. I had a lot of practice at having to let relationships go and not cling too tightly to anything. I definitely think that helped form that part of my personality.
So what was the first major role or persona that you identified with as you kind of grew up through your adolescence?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the first role I would say that I really identified with, it lasted all the way up through my 30s to a great degree, was that I played music. I started playing music when I was 11 or 12 and quickly understood that people treated me differently. It was something that people thought was special, and it was definitely something I used being in many new situations to get people to like me. Mm-hmm. And to connect with people on more intimate levels. And from a very early age, I considered myself as Danny the musician, and that's not only what I would do, but who I was.
And in seeing it that way, was your sense of self-worth heavily wrapped up with that identity?
Yes. That's where I got my sense of self-worth. Because, I ended up dropping out of school just after my freshman year of high school. I didn't come from a place of money or status or anything like that. Where I received almost all of my self-worth was through the attention I got from playing music.
And also during that time, you had some traumatic things happen. Do you want to talk about that at all, as far as your dad and being kind of in this free fall sort of path?
Sure. When I was 14 years old, my father committed suicide. And that, as you can imagine, colored, choices that I made after that, and to a great degree, how I felt about the world in general. It was during that time, music was a very, very powerful force and a saving grace for me. That was my source of comfort and safety, and where I received the kind of attention that I thought was worthwhile.
So that's what really nurtured you through all these times. To a great degree,
yeah.
And as you then became a little older, you kind of made a major shift when you were about 19, correct? And joined the military.
That's correct.
Talk more about stepping into that role kind of husband, soldier, all that entailed, and how it kind of clashed with your previous identity a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So when I was 19, I ended up meeting a girl who I fell in love with, and it really changed a lot. I mean, everything for me at that time. I'd done quite a bit of drugs and partying, and part of that whole lifestyle was presenting me an option that I saw very clearly. And when I met this girl, I knew that I couldn't continue down that path. She came from a very different background, was religious. Parents were still married, grandparents were still married, all highly educated, just the opposite background that I had. And I was determined to prove to her and her family and everyone that I could take care of her and do whatever was necessary. So at that particular moment, music kind of got in the way of that, and it did create a minor breakdown of sorts. In panic, I didn't know what I was going to do, and I happened to be walking by the military recruitment station and went in there, and I still to this day don't know why I walked in, because it was the opposite of everything that I was up to that point. But I went in and talked to them, and they filled my head with a lot of
delusions of grandeur.
Yes, a lot of stories that, they basically told me that if I joined the military, that I could go to college and I could possibly have a degree before or by the time I was out of my first enlistment. I thought that's exactly what I needed, having no education. I don't think I even had a driver's license at that time. Didn't have a credit card. I had nothing, right? So I ended up joining the Army in the infantry, and huge change.
So as you are beginning your life in the military, what kind of things did you learn about yourself as far as personal limitations,
Right. No, I discovered a great many things about myself in the military, and I'm very grateful for the experience. I was very grateful to get out as well, but yeah, I had the wonderful opportunity to be in situations where I truly believed that I could not go forward, that I could not do it, could not make it physically, mentally, and I somehow was able to put one foot in front of the other for, a much greater distance than I thought possible. And having multiple experiences like that really showed me how much more capacity we have as humans, and it was extremely liberating.
So it really expanded your perspective of what you're capable of, like mentally,
Absolutely.
Physically, everything about that.
Yes.
So you're in this identity of soldier, father, husband. Tell us about when you transitioned away from the military.
All of the promises of the recruiters turned out to be lies, essentially. I ended up being in the same position when I got out as when I first entered, 3 years later. And except for this time I was married with a child, my son. And so I needed to figure out something to do and how I was going to take care of them. This entire time, by the way, I still had heavily identified with music.
Mm-hmm.
And that was still I was just kind of going through the military, was kind of like just a side note. It was this thing I was doing for the moment.
Uh-huh.
But in my heart, that's still how I identified. I would still, when introduced to people, would be one of the first things that I said that I did.
Right.
So upon getting out of the military, I ended up getting just a normal, office type job, and it wasn't cutting it. I wasn't making enough money. My wife was a stay-at-home mother, and there was a lot of anxiety at that time. I didn't know what I was going to do, and this was around the .com explosion and tech explosion, and I ended up getting turned on to computer networking. I thought, that's something that I can do. You don't need to have a 4-year degree to end up getting a good job that paid well. And so I got some books and started studying, and within 4 or 5 months, I had gotten a networking certification and hired on at my first tech job.
How did that feel, starting, knowing nothing about this stuff really, and having to teach it to yourself? How did that affect your feelings about yourself? Or was it not really a big deal? Are you pretty comfortable in like the novice position?
I don't think that the whole novice position had really that much to do with how I felt about myself in relation to what I was doing, with these other much more experienced people. I'm fine being the novice. I actually like being looked at as a novice and the new guy when I'm exploring new terrain. But it was really nerve-wracking, to be honest with you. And for most of my tech career, because I never had a formal foundation, and this is probably just purely like a mental, stumbling block that I possess, but I always figured because I didn't formally study, software engineering or computer engineering in a university and have, the degrees and all this kind of stuff, that was kind of like a fraud, and I was always out to prove, my worth. Mm-hmm. So I had a very low sense of self-worth when it came to these positions and the different jobs that I held, even senior level when I got to that point.
Yeah, I remember hearing you talk when you were a senior software engineer about certain things like that, and I remember thinking it was so strange that to still come up against feelings of kind of inadequacy. And I think that's pretty normal for anyone who's doing anything. Everyone feels like a fraud at first. So you continued to work your way up through this software world, and you were still doing music at that time.
Right. At the time,
you still had the clashing.
It was very heavy. Yeah. At that time, when I got my first, this is actually before I even started in software engineering. I was working for a software company doing network support, and I was also in a band that was gaining success and being noticed by big record labels, and it was a very, very stressful time of life. I had obviously my authentic self was all I wanted to do was play music, you know. But at the time, the group, even though we were finding the success, was highly unstable, and I knew it. So yeah, I was constantly being pulled on where I should be spending the most effort, and whether or not I can let go of the identities that I was forming or had held for many years already. You know, with anytime I would think about like, well, this music stuff, you know, it's probably not going to work out, and I have a family and kids. I mean, the part of me would immediately go, but you play music. That's who you are. Mm-hmm. You can't not be that, right? You know, and then it would switch to, well, if I just like focused more energy on the technology and furthering my career, you know, I can make more money and I can have the status that I was starting to feel when people were, you know, introduced to me and they found out that I was in technology. There was a certain level of respect, and people thought you were smart, and all these things that you tell yourself are important. In that frame of mind, that state, you think are important.
So the allurement of the money and the status seemed more sure in engineering than in music. So, but your band was ultimately really, it was signed to Atlantic Records.
Right. We ultimately did get a record deal with Atlantic, and there was a lot of anxiety with that because the record company told me I had to quit my job. Mm-hmm. And at that time, again, the whole fraud thing, I felt in my heart that if I was to quit the job and then something was to happen with the band, that I'd never get another job that good again. Like, I believed that in my heart. I believed that I had tricked them sufficiently that they hired me, but I wouldn't be able to do that again. Right. So there's a lot of anxiety in the band. The other guys in the band at the time were all going through their own issues and dealing with them in a less than optimal way. That I saw where we were heading very quickly, even though we were finding this success with the record company. And the band did end up breaking up before we released our first album. And when that happened, it was agony. It was a death of a certain part of my being, I felt. Like, I mean, I sold all my music gear. I told myself I'd never play music again after that. I mean, that only lasted for a few years, but at the time it was heavy. It was probably my first very conscious identity crisis, where I didn't know who I was now that I didn't have music. I mean, even up to that time, technology and my job and everything else I had done was like a jacket that I put on, but it wasn't who I was.
Right. It's music, completely secondary.
Yeah, it was who I was. And then that shift, I turned and focused pretty much all of my attention, other than with my family, towards software and engineering, and that became the replacement for that for years.
So did you, once that happened, begin to identify more with the whole concept of Danny the engineer? Did you start assigning the self-worth and the sense of identity you felt in music to this new different role you were playing?
I did. I mean, I was still at that state where I was looking for external validation in everything that I did. You know what I'm saying? So now that I didn't have music, where was I going to find that? And I threw myself into studying software engineering. And I mean, I would study it and work on it 15 hours a day. And I ended up getting good at it and finding jobs with more responsibilities and working on the quote unquote cooler types of things. And that became how I identified myself, and where I got a tremendous amount of self-worth was how other people perceived the whole concept of being smart and doing something that most people believed they couldn't do.
Mm-hmm. So how did that bring you into your next major identity crisis, being your divorce? What happened inside your mind being a husband, and then that role is not there anymore? Right.
Yeah, that was definitely an earth-shattering, event for me. It changed everything. I was 30 years old, and everything up to that point that I thought that I knew or believed to be solid and true, it just was crumbling in front of me. It was shortly after, actually, the band broke up that I was signed to Atlantic with, and it was devastating. I mean, I didn't know who or what to be at all, and I went into a room and locked myself in there pretty much for 6 months and reflected on every encounter with my ex-wife that I'd ever had from the moment that I first saw her to the last time we spoke. And I did it several times, actually, and it was a very interesting process.
What did you discover, like, in general?
I mean, in general, really what I discovered was that I had held all of these, fantasies, really, in my mind about who we were, who she was, who I was. I was able to really look at our relationship and both of us as individuals in a much more objective way. And through doing that, I was able to come to some really uncomfortable realizations about myself and about my behavior in the relationship that I had never consciously noticed or really seen. And the same with her, or towards her. And that allowed me to, I would say, very quickly let go of many negative emotions and have a deeper understanding of the situation that allowed me to forgive myself, to forgive her, and to really be vulnerable and open to continuing life, in a positive way.
And do you think that losing that sense of certainty about, you had one idea of how everything was, how you were, who you were, who she was, all of that, and then to understand that your certainty was not certain, it was mistaken,
right,
and misplaced. How has that helped you going forward? Has that become a really important concept as far as approaching everything in life?
Absolutely. Through that process, exactly like you just said, but before the divorce, there were so many things I was certain of. And after the divorce, there was almost nothing I was certain of. And I chose to see that as a beautiful thing and accept it for what it was. And it has altered my decision-making process for the better. The decisions that I make now and how I hold my beliefs about relationships or people is totally different than it was before. Now allows me to approach them with more understanding and more openness, as opposed to holding on to some preconceived notion.
That's really where progress begins. Where you have certainty, you don't have room to, or openness to, different ideas, positive ideas, things that are growth promoting.
I completely agree.
So after this time, you kind of threw yourself into jiu-jitsu. Do you want to talk a little bit about beginning that and how wearing that mask, adopting this other persona kind of shifted things a little more for you?
Yeah, it did. When I was in the military, I boxed a little bit and loved the workout and just the art in general. And being in the military and being in the infantry in particular, it's a very physical and mentally demanding, thing. And I had missed that. I'd been sitting at a computer, staring at a screen for the last 5 years, not really doing anything. So a gym had recently opened up where I was at in Sacramento, close by, and a buddy of mine talked me into going down and checking it out. And they had boxing and this thing called jiu-jitsu. I didn't know what jiu-jitsu was at the time. And the Brazilian instructor kept trying to harass me into taking a class. And I finally gave in and was hooked on day one.
What about it was so intriguing to you?
Oh, there's so many things. I mean, that first experience, I was able to see just how powerful, in the first class that I took, there was a bunch of like professional fighters, like big, scary looking dudes in there, right? And there was a few smaller guys, right? And one guy in particular was much smaller, much like less athletic looking than me. And I thought for certain that I crush this guy if we're gonna spar or whatever. And in jiu-jitsu you spar like from day one, right? So when the instructor was matching us up, he happened to match me up with this guy, and I was just like, thank you, yes. I won't look like such a huge fool on this first time. And this guy, I probably outweighed him by 20-30 pounds, and he threw me around. It was very humbling. And immediately I was like, I wanted to know what this guy knew. And I was interested in understanding how that happened. And I became addicted almost immediately to it. It wasn't just the, strength. It wasn't just the physicality of what you're doing. It was a game of chess. It was very mentally challenging as well. Not to mention that it was one of the most grueling, workouts I'd ever had. So, it just, all the boxes were checked from day one.
And so the level of vulnerability that happens when you do jiu-jitsu, especially when you're just beginning.
Yes.
In gym, like that's very intimidating.
It is.
And we both worked at the same jiu-jitsu gym, and I would watch the new people come in, and it was especially the big guys who came, the big, strong, tough guys who were like, oh, I could take anyone. I'm used to all this stuff. They come and they get thrown around by a 5'0" scrawny kid who's younger and weaker than them. It's pretty incredible. Like, it's
a beautiful, beautiful art. I highly recommend everybody to do it, to try it at least. It offers the opportunity for growth in so many ways. Literally, you have to learn to accept the moment. Just that alone is something that everyone could greatly benefit. And if everyone learned to be in the moment and accept it for what it is, I believe this world would be a different place just on that principle alone, But yeah, if you are rolling with some 15-year-old, kid who is 40 pounds less than you, and he has your arm or your neck, and you don't want to concede to the reality of that moment that you've lost, or that you were in that poor position. Reality comes cracking down on you very hard when your arm gets snapped backwards or you're choked unconscious. It is an instant teacher. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's powerful. Well, yeah, we could go on about the Zen of jiu-jitsu and all its virtues.
Absolutely.
But since we are focusing more today on identity, let's talk about... So this is the time that I met you. You were Danny the jiu-jitsu instructor and Danny the engineer. Right.
And at that time I was competing. I was starting to win tournaments. I'd gone and competed in like big tournament, and I was starting to identify very heavily with that again. Even though that was starting to build in me again, those old habits of making decisions based on my so-called identity, I'd learned enough lessons that I didn't take it too far. I ended up getting injured. I was injured many times, but I was injured in particular when I first met you. And that's actually how we started really spending more time talking.
I remember it well.
When you started weaving your spell.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So you, by that point in time, had learned the cautionary tales of like over-identifying with the roles you play. So when you were able to compete hard and then suddenly not able to compete hard because you were injured, it wasn't such a blow to your...
Yeah,
it wasn't such an identity crisis
right.
as it could have
it was still difficult, and I still fought. I mean, there was many times where, I went and competed a week after I broke 2 ribs.
Fool.
Like a fool. Yes, exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm still paying for it to this day. So, obviously I didn't completely learn my lesson.
But,
right. But yeah, I didn't take it to such extremes where like I had complete breakdowns like I did over, my music or my ex-wife or other times in my life. I was able to put things into perspective a little better.
So you kept doing jiu-jitsu. You worked your way up through various engineering positions.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about the kind of culmination of your engineering persona.
Sure. So, I had been working as a software engineer now at this point for about 14, 15 years. And I had just gotten a really fancy, high-paying job in Silicon Valley in Mountain View, where I was commuting 3.5 hours each way.
Horrendous.
Yeah, it was an interesting time. But again, it was all of those, wow, yeah, this is uncomfortable and a difficult commute and all this, but it's, best for, I'm making a lot of money. This is really, a high status job.
Heavily praised by the various people in your community.
Right, by community, family, all that kind of stuff. So it was easy for me to come up with clever ways to justify it.
Uh-huh.
But when I was quiet, I felt the same way that I felt when I was 12, that I just wanted to play music or I just wanted to create. I wanted to be creative. That's what I like to do. I had just conditioned myself over the years to think that I couldn't make that a reality and have a family and live in society, so to speak. And so I was working this job, and it was really starting to weigh heavy on me for pretty much my entire software engineering career because of my low self-worth and self-esteem. I was constantly trying to prove myself. I was working 15 hours a day. I would never took a day off. I mean, even when I was on vacation, I was working. Christmas morning, I'd get a few hours in before the kids woke up. On anniversaries, every single day, I did some sort of work or was thinking about it. And it had finally caught up with me. And I found a book written by a guy named Steven Pressfield called The War of Art. And it was a very easy, quick read where he was outlining the many clever ways that we fool ourselves into thinking we can't live authentically. Basically, that's what it was about. And I read it, the entire book, on my morning commute. And I walked into my boss's office and told him that I quit. And then had to 3.5 hours to figure out what I was going to tell my wife when I got home. Which, when I did get home, and because I hadn't told you, right?
No, I had no idea. I mean, I was like feeling super bad for you every day and thinking this is not sustainable. But yeah, you didn't tell me beforehand.
I came home and told you that I'd quit my job and asked you what you thought about possibly opening up a tattoo shop.
You did.
Yeah. And to my credit, I will say that it's due to all of my years of honest self-reflection and really working towards making better decisions that allowed me to see in you the kind of person that would say something like, I think that's a fantastic idea. And not make me sleep outside.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I did it.
You did do it. That was not surprising that you quit your job, but I hadn't ever. It was surprising because you had never tattooed before. You kind of like to draw, but it wasn't like, oh, your big thing. So it did, I mean, for you, it didn't come out of left field. You'd spent months thinking about it.
It spent actually a couple years kind of just like throwing around the idea. At first, what my idea was that I was going to just open a shop and own it and invest, because I have a really, one of my best friends is a great tattoo artist, and I was going to just open a shop for him and be the business partner in it. But then over the years, I would fantasize about being in a position where I could just create art all day, and what kind of, you know, activity or job can I pursue that will allow me to be creative and create art all day, but still have the opportunity to have an income. And I couldn't come up with, you know, anything other than tattooing. Yeah.
So we ended up moving to Washington.
Yes.
Land of enchanted forests and heavily tattooed people.
Absolutely love Olympia, Washington. Is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to. And we went up there, we opened the Copper Wolf Tattoo and Art Gallery.
And that was really amazing to see. The evolution. For one, the weight that you had before was weight of forcing yourself to do something that ultimately you were just doing for the money. Like,
I did not believe in what I was doing.
You didn't believe in it. Like, you didn't get personal meaning out of it. And then to watch you launch yourself into something that you did find personally meaningful and stimulating, even though it was super hard. Like,
the most difficult thing I've ever done, by far.
Your entire vibe at that time became significantly different. It became significantly more light and free.
Yeah. For the first time in my life, since a child, I was operating from a place of like honest authenticity. Like, I was doing really what I wanted to do, and I was doing it every day. I mean, it took a while for me to get used to it. I mean, it was more than one occasion where I would stop myself after like sitting there and drawing a design or like doing a painting or coloring for, you know, hours, and I would get this flash of panic, like I was playing hooky or, you know, going to be arrested for, you know, not being at the work or something. Yeah, having too much fun. It was real. I mean, I had to like talk myself off of that ledge. You know, like, no, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Because you're sitting with your best friend in your shop, listening to music you like, and meeting cool people and drawing pictures all day.
Absolutely. It was beautiful.
It is beautiful.
And remember, I had zero experience in tattooing. Tattooing is a very permanent thing. You know, it's literally one of the hardest things that I'd ever done. And I'm going from being like a professional, an expert in one field, and starting over again as a complete novice. You know, someone with no experience and no like real understanding, just like a desire to want to learn.
How do you think your own vulnerability and openness to this new experience impacted your connections with the people that came into your shop? Tattooing is an intimate experience.
Extremely.
Talk about how, I don't know, how meaningful it was to be able to connect to people in this way after having been trapped behind a computer screen for years and years.
was unbelievable. I mean, at that time, too, I had started to work a lot more on meditation and really spending a lot of time in reflection, and not so much from like a painful, negative point of view, but like just building new habits moving forward, and working at the shop and being able to connect with humans on an extremely intimate level. I'm touching their body. I'm working with an idea that they have that most of the time is very meaningful to them, commemorating a birth or honoring a death of a loved one. It was unbelievable, the conversation that would come out of a 2-3 hour tattooing session. You become very close with people, and people tend to be much more honest, I found, in that situation because of that vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And I found an opportunity to connect with people and to share my ideas and thoughts about health and nutrition, which is something that I'd really been interested in ever since the military and all, especially through jiu-jitsu and all that stuff. My thoughts on living a good life, just having conversation about it. And it was impactful, not only for me, but for many of the people that I met.
Yeah, they would come back and time again for their therapy sessions.
Yeah, they would. I mean, you'd have a lot of repeat clients that become not just clients, but friends. And you can see transformation occur in their life. We've had probably close to a dozen people that struggled with health issues or weight problems that through conversations at the shop with me and Ryan would try out a whole foods plant-based diet and have some serious results. It was amazing.
Yeah, it was beautiful. It was a beautiful experience to grow that business from scratch, from completely nothing, grow your knowledge and skills at tattooing from completely nothing. So why are we sitting here in Mexico after right. You successfully did that and it was this beautiful thing?
I mean, to me, it was the obvious next step. Mm-hmm. I know it's not obvious probably to anybody else, but when you start living authentically and you stop making excuses for why you can or can't do something or live the life that you want to live, you find yourself in a position of truly making things happen.
Right. You understood after, if you can move to Washington and open a tattoo shop and learn how to tattoo, then you can certainly do whatever else you want to do.
Right. And
which for us included moving to Mexico.
Right. It's something, moving to a Spanish-speaking country was something that I've wanted to do ever since I was a small child. And becoming fluent and connecting with that culture was something that I've always wanted to do. I realized that this was just as good a time as any. And there was many things that kind of lined up, but the biggest thing was just that I didn't allow fear to control my thought process anymore, my decision making behaviors anymore. So did a lot of research. I first brought it up in like the end of November, December, and we planned for 6 months and made it happen.
And I think that was an interesting illustration of to do things that are kind of new and disruptive, to your normal routine and how you're living in the world. It's a quick, easy thing. As far as the decision, the decision was clear that, this is what we want to do. Yes, let's do it.
Right.
And then comes all the preparation and the making it happen.
Right. In my opinion, all of that stuff is very simple and easy as well.
Uh-huh.
It's the fear and the not wanting to feel discomfort from your friends and family thinking that you're a maniac for wanting to do stuff like that, to the actual discomfort you're going to feel being in a foreign place, not understanding anybody, having to put a lot of effort into learning a new language and learning a new lifestyle, basically, we had to.
Right.
Yeah, but it's not hard.
No. It's just understanding that, being able to sit in that discomfort of newness and weirdness and judgment and whatever else comes when you make a choice like that. It brings you to the point where you get to walk down to the beach every day as often as you want, and talk about what else you're doing here.
The other thing that I've always wanted to do for whatever reason, a lot of it, I think, it started back in my youth and feeling, self-conscious about not being educated and being around a lot of highly educated people. I always wanted to go and get my degree, and I tried several times during my software career to go back and study engineering, and it never felt right. It was always really boring and felt like a waste of time. And then I would stop, and a certain amount of time would go by, and the idea would pop back in my head, and I would just, wrestle with it over and over, and it just never worked out. And now I'm through my second year of art school studying illustration, and I absolutely love every day of it. It's fantastic.
So you are here, a new student again. This time of illustration.
Right.
It's very exciting.
Very exciting. I'm very, very lucky that I can see. I really consider myself lucky to have the understanding that life is amazing and can be beautiful when you approach it with a curiosity and with a desire to learn over, clinging to some sort of, past accolade or status, and not putting yourself in a position where you're forced to overcome obstacles and discomforts and progress.
So it is the actual act of not identifying with all these past things to the point where you're clinging and unable to let them go that has brought you the freedom to make room for these new experiences and new learning and new growth.
I think so. I mean, these days I don't feel that I have like this identity that I cling to, that I have anything that I associate as what I am. I'm open to the moment, and I don't fear being the newbie. I don't fear being inexperienced and uncomfortable. And it's not because I'm some tough guy or anything like that. It's because I understand, after putting myself in that situation, many times before, what comes out of it.
Which is, if you could sum it up, what comes out of letting that stuff go and not being driven by fear? What major attitude do you have to to kind of remember on a daily basis in order to maintain that approach.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, some people might take this as a dark, thought. It's not. But I often think about death daily, not like in a morbid way, but in a real way. It is a fact. We are going to die, and it's what makes life beautiful in a great many ways. And because of the way that I look at that, I believe it has helped me to understand that the moment and the minutes we have are precious, and you should spend your time doing what you want to do and not, operating from a place of fear or anxiety based on some, identity that you think you are. That some identity that other people think you are, your family, your friends, your coworkers, that's not where it's at. It hasn't been for me. I don't think it is for anybody. Really contemplating, death and mortality that way has allowed me to be much more forgiving of myself and of others, and be open to greater understanding of everything.
Especially, I would assume, of understanding your true values, what is most meaningful to you in life, and being able to act on that.
Right.
Because the first step is really trying to, what is that actually? Like, what are your values?
Well, when you at a deeper level, when you go down just a little bit deeper and you really understand that you're going to die, then the fear of looking silly over, what you're wearing, or not being good at, this particular thing at the moment, that vanishes.
Right.
You don't hold on to these identities that society and the people around you help prop up,
Right. It's a really powerful practice. I was just reading a book where there's a group of monks. I don't remember which book it was or where this group lives, but the way that they greet each other when they pass each other, they don't say hi, they don't say namaste, they say remember death in Latin.
Gangster.
That is their greeting. That's all they say to each other is remember death.
That's it. I mean, it's a really wonderful meditation. It really is.
Thank you, honey. That was some really great insights.
My pleasure, my love.
Are there anything else that you could leave our listeners with as far as, I don't know, any other nuggets of wisdom?
I'm not filled with too many nuggets of wisdom, I can easily admit. I will say, I mean, it really is important to not focus on avoiding discomfort. Embrace it. It's just as valuable, if not more so, than, just walking around in bliss and happiness. I mean, that's great, but all these things change. Nothing lasts. And these are all very cliche things, but they're real.
Right.
And if you can implement it on a deeper conscious level and more of a moment-to-moment level, your decisions will be more authentic. And in turn, your life will be more authentic.
Especially the understanding that everything changes. That is a concept that works immediately in those moments. If you apply it in this moment of anxiety or depression, or name any negative emotion that people don't want to feel, it immediately lessens the panic that,
Absolutely.
what if I'm never going to feel better again? Like that's a really important concept.
It's powerful.
Well, thank you again.
You are welcome again, my dear.
I will interview you again sometime.
I hope you do. This was fun.
Yeah, that's really fun. Next week we're going to have another interview with our energy expert, Danielle Bryan. So tune into that. We were going to talk about modern shamanism with her. And if you are interested in seeing any of Danny's artwork, he has some amazing stuff up on his Facebook and Instagram. Do you want to tell people?
Sure. My Instagram link is, I believe my handle is Cognitronic, and you can also find some of my artwork at thecopperwolf.com, as well as some art from the other amazing artists who work at the shop.
So check it out. Washington listeners, go harass Ryan at the Copper Wolf.
And Rudy.
Yeah.
Before we part, we'd like to say thanks for listening, and we hope you'll connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We would love to hear from you and appreciate all feedback, shares, and likes.
To learn more and subscribe to our newsletter, visit Intentionists.com. And no matter where you are or what you're creating, we send you love and invite you to breathe and begin.
See you next week.